Welcome, wrestling fans. You've seen a lot of videos on the internet, and usually it's a lot of these nerds talking about, oh, John Cena sucks, and look how many wrestling DVDs I have, and TNA this and TNA that. We're the Wrestling Roundtable. We're here to dispel some myths you might have, to open your eyes, give you some new perspective, hopefully some opinions and insight you haven't had before. And joining me on the panel today, to my left, which would be your right, is Lawrence Haber, a fan of 21 years. He's a professional musician and instructor whose work has been featured in independent promotions. To my right, that would be your left, is Rodney LeConte. He's been a fan of 19 years. He's a New York film student and MTV employee. I'm your host, Eric Santamaria. I've been a fan of 19 years. I'm a videographer, and I've worked in wrestling for a while now. And our first show here is going to start off with a very controversial topic. That would be,
to say the least,
yeah, that would be Chris Benoit and what is his legacy. Now, to preface this, all three of us were huge Chris Benoit fans. All the way back to WCW, we were very passionate about this guy, much like the internet was. You know, he's the best worker, and he's held down, and this and that. And any jokes we might make, let's just say it's like the clown. We laugh so that we may not cry. It's such an absurd situation, sometimes you can't help but make a joke about it. Although I can't think of anything funnier than the media reporting that Benoit killed his kid with crossface.
They called him the Canadian cripple for a reason.
That was pretty funny. But what we'd like to do is talk about Chris Benoit and what his legacy is. How is he going to affect wrestling perhaps for years to come? And the first thing we want to talk about is, how do you see, as we just mentioned, wrestling being affected by his murders, if at all?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
How is it affected? I mean, obviously in a negative way. I mean, pro wrestling has always been the bottom of the barrel, bottom of the ladder in the entertainment world. I mean, no matter what kind of ratings, no matter what kind of publicity, people are always going to see wrestling in a negative light because, you know, just everything that's been happening. And with these murders, it kind of gives people a reason to justify why pro wrestling is lame, is, you know, too scripted and everything, and how these guys are just steroid freaks who like to fight each other and bash each other with chairs. I mean, it's taken its toll, and it really made people look at the wrestlers and the wrestling schedule in a different light. You know, these guys don't have seasons, they don't have many days off, you know, they're away from their families the whole time. Now, you know, it's gonna mess with your head a little bit. And, you know, putting your body through the punishment that they do night in and night out. And it just makes you look at how the scheduling could change. So these guys, so we could stop seeing our heroes dying. You know, you don't have baseball fans every, you know, year or so they expect another two of their favorite baseball players to die. It doesn't happen at the end of the sport. In wrestling, it sucks because we're like almost immune to it now with these deaths.
How do you think wrestling's going to be affected?
I think I have to agree with Rod, as far as the media goes, probably it's going to just take what's already perceived as a very low form of entertainment and going to give it an even more horrible name, I guess is the best way to put it. But the baseball analogy is interesting because if we talk about how it's going to affect wrestling in terms of the wrestling universe, I don't think it affects it really at all. I think people are going to cry for a while, and they'll always remember it. But you know, in a lot of ways, it's no different than any other overdose, even though there was murder involved, and it was the murder of someone's family, which, you know, if I, you know, being in the business I'm in, if one of my colleagues lived the same lifestyle as me and overdosed on drugs or something, I might reconsider, you know, having a drink or something. But it's so much different when they kill their own family, and it's perceived as that being related to wrestling somehow. It makes you question what you're doing. But wrestling seems to be a unique animal like that, and I don't think wrestlers are necessarily like that because it's such a, and we've heard this actually on the WWF's Roundtable show, a fraternity. To get in is so difficult, and once you're in, it's like at any cost, by any means necessary.
Especially
to make
now,
it.
it's a very close circle.
Right, but to get back what I was going to say about baseball, baseball's not going to change at all with the recent Barry Bonds perjury accusation and the report, I think Senator Congressman Mitchell or something, about all the names of all these baseball players that supposedly bought steroids are going to be outed, and apparently there's going to be some wrestlers on this list too. It doesn't change baseball, and baseball makes a lot more money, so why would it change wrestling?
Well, I have an article about that right here in front of me from the Asbury Park Press here in New Jersey.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Oh, some fine arts right there.
Well, you like to point out how Benoit was never a big star outside of wrestling, like a mainstream star like Austin or Hogan.
Yeah.
But there he is on the cover of People magazine.
Yep.
It's giving wrestling all this exposure it never got before. And
The
this,
wrong kind of exposure.
Well, this article
Not
is
that
about
it matters.
that. It's
and
about
publicist is good. Any press is good press, so to speak.
in
you know?
McMahon's mind,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
well, obviously that's proving to be
okay,
not true.
Fair enough.
McMahon planned it.
But this article talks about that, about how the Congress is going to have a session about steroids in sports, wrestling, baseball, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
This isn't the exposure McMahon sort of wanted. He didn't want this sort of mainstream
Well, it's a witch
attention.
hunt, basically. It's going to be a public, in a court of law, dissection of wrestling.
This article by Steve Feitel says that wrestling has no union, no benefits, this schedule, beating each other night in, night
Stuff
out,
that we-
and all this stuff that we and wrestling fans know. But all of a sudden, this is a surprise to someone here, and he says, "Why isn't there change? Why isn't the Congress do something about it?" I don't see anything happening.
Can I interject?
I don't see wrestling really changing. Go ahead.
Well, and you know why? And this is sad. The three of us all totally agree on this.
We've seen it before.
But from this is from this article is coming from an outside perspective. Will wrestling change as far as the outside goes? It's not going to change as far as the inside goes. I think we're all pretty aware of that. That's probably the better question to ask among wrestling fans, because if the fans don't want it to,
We've
change,
seen the drug testing come and go.
Of course, but
many
the
times.
fans don't care either, because the fans will turn on Raw the next week or
Right.
Impact or whatever. But as far as this writer goes, here's a writer who, like you said, is almost surprised by it.
Right.
So he didn't even start to do the digging because there's so much stuff that the mainstream
doesn't know
doesn't
half of
even know. You know, I mean, Benoit is only scratching the surface, because if people found out, the reason why Benoit was a star among fans, it's because we always thought he wasn't the typical steroid user guy. Like, if they actually got into that, or like when Jericho was on Larry King, if Larry King had asked, "Why did you leave wrestling in the first place?" to Jericho, which we know the real answer, he couldn't deal with it anymore, couldn't live with that lifestyle, then it opens up Pandora's box, and they don't even realize that yet. You know?
Well, Larry King's the safe one to go to. That's why they go on.
Yeah.
I mean, he's asking questions like, in 2007, does the audience know it's fake? Of course they do, unless you're 4.
Is it really?
Stanford, you're on here.
Well, I was actually reading an interview with Rob Van Dam where he pointed out something I didn't even think about before. After Benoit's brain scan came back of all this damage to his brain cells, Van Dam said that pilots have a certain limit that they can fly, a certain amount of time they can spend in the air, whereas wrestlers are getting their heads slammed every night of the week almost, and flying all the time.
Well, look at the NFL.
What sort of effect is that going to have?
Yeah, I mean, look at the NFL. These guys are getting, laid out every week, getting concussions, and a lot of them play hurt and lie about it because they don't want to lose their spot. But
sounds familiar.
If it affects the team and the image, the NFL will interject, because, I mean, recently, like, we had this guy, Sean Taylor, got killed last week. The NFL has not done a good job recently with taking care of their players as far as their image goes, but they always make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen to the best of their ability. Whereas Vince McMahon could really care less, it seems.
As long as he can get his product out there, then more people will watch. Yeah,
he's already resigned
That's what I
himself. He's already resigned himself to the idea that people are going to hate him, so he's going to use it to fuel that.
Broaden his product.
To play devil's advocate before we go to our first break, McMahon has sent a lot of people to rehab.
Yeah, but why does it have to take a suicide and 2 deaths for him to do that? It should have been done a long time ago.
Because he's a promoter and he wants to make money. And we need to take our first break, so stay tuned and we'll be back with more discussion about Chris Benoit and his influence on wrestling. Posthumous!